Back to another week of the Discord discussions. This week's topic is masculinity and what it looks like versus the perception of it. And this week we have just returning gentlemen here, Chris and Phil. We will be hoping to shed light on what masculinity should look like and what it looked like in the past and what that versus the perception that is being presented to us today. And I think, as an example, I'm going to take a simple thing of if you go back to the 50s and 60s and you look at how men dressed, how men behaved, how men were, you know, there was a great number of things that weren't good about men in that era, but they wore suits, they opened doors, they treated women in very, very high regard. They were they were constituted towards defending the weak. They were constituted towards being productive members of society, taking care of their family. Whereas now, most men, or at least masculinity, is presented as a negative, not a positive. And I think that's part of the societal challenge we have right now is that you have a generation that has no idea what a good man looks like, let alone how to be one. So,
Yeah, it's not something that's even a top. I mean, I don't think it's not a topic of discussion casually or like academically or in any kind of. It's just not a topic. I don't think it ever had to be a topic because it was so innate to the society and our culture for so long, and then all of a sudden we stripped it away and even worse rejected most of it. And so now we're in this weird position where we don't have, it's like the chain feels like the chain has been broken that goes back, all the way to our primordial past, where it's just I doubt that um any, well, there would be an interesting, I wonder if there's ever been another um time like this where the very idea of masculinity itself is uh, in question, up for debate, even. I can't think of another time in history, or even like try and synthesize one off the top, like just try and come up with one where it would be possible for that conversation to happen. Because I think in order for that to happen, you really do have to have um, like the rise of technology and the rise of feminism. I think those two things kind of have to be there in order for you to get to a position where masculinity becomes so discredited and so abandoned that you have several generations of men that were basically raised by their mothers and with no consent. Like we lack something that I think probably, I don't want to say for sure, but I would say almost certainly all other men in human history have had, which is a firm sense of like our own maleness and masculinity. I don't think any other men in history have ever had the conversation because the conversation didn't need to happen.
well,
It would be
it
a
was
very
had
quick
between
question. Are you a man? Yeah. Are you? Yeah. Good. Done.
yeah,
I mean, it's just,
and
there was nothing to talk about.
there was an understood perception of what that required.
And everyone was putting forth those same like social and physical signals and signifiers. So yeah, it was, it was funny. I saw this is congruent with my own. I've had a few gay friends over the years, and they've all been very masculine. Like they're all pretty butch guys who just, and they're gay. And I saw some. I'll have to find it again. I'll have to dig it up. It was some. I think it was the cover of a gay porn mag from back in the '70s, but the dudes were naked. It was just two buff, shirtless dudes working on like on a hot rod American car in a garage, and there was actually like the only homoerotic subtext was the fact maybe that they had their shirts off and that this is for what the magazine is. But I was just like, even that like there's this perception that like all like gay guys are naturally like not masculine or fruity or something, and I'm like, even in their own literature back before things really got crazy, like gay guys were portraying themselves along those traditionally masculine lines, like a couple of guys covered in oil and grease and sweat working on a car doing manly physical stuff. Like it's all the same. It's just, and it's funny because that kind of gay guy, again, this would be where it would be, I should try and get one of my friends to come in, because this would be, I don't want to speak for them, but I've I've been around that culture because I've had gay friends, and um, the newer versions of gay guys, like the Zoomer gay guys, seem to be, and this is my very anecdotal perception, seem to be way less traditionally masculine than those, that like the gay friends I've had are all my age. They're all in their 40s, so they all grew up in the hyper masculine 80s and 90s, and they're all like what I consider masculine guys. They just fuck other dudes. That's it. That's the only difference.
And
And
now,
it's but and they talk about it too, about how annoying it is that, like, was it that show Will and Grace, that one character, not Will, but that side character who was just that over the top, super effeminate, super fruity gay guy, that's like the stereotype that most of the younger gay guys are modeling themselves after now. And I would suspect it's because those more traditionally masculine, um, whatever you like, behaviors and representations, that had nothing to do with gayness back in the 60s and 70s. Like those dudes were still pretty, like they were pretty masculine dudes. You go into like a gay bar, like a gay biker leather bar in the 60s or 70s, and start slinging gay slurs around,
because you'll
you
get a
might
beating.
die.
Yeah.
You're going to get a beating and you might die. And it's just, and it's a totally, they talk about how that, yeah, and I would suspect it's because that like true masculinity actually doesn't have
The
a lot to
sexualization.
do, it doesn't really have a lot to do with sexualization at all. I think that everything that you can make um like fall along that gender binary of male and female, you can, I think you can iron that out to make it for like masculine partner. And I mean, in all the gay long-term gay couplings I've seen, there's been a masculine partner and there's been a feminine partner. So I think that's the way it is there
So
too.
there's
It makes sense.
so masculinity in
So it's about how you treat your partners, just to finish
correct.
the
Yeah.
thought. Yeah.
And I think that there's also, like, we had talked about this before, where there's information that's generationally handed down from father to son that is the precursor of how a man should behave, right?
That's what I'm talking about. My metaphor of the chain has been broken, just
Yeah.
to add on to what you're saying. That is exactly what I meant, is that, yeah. And I think the chain's also been broken from mother to daughter about
Oh
how
yeah, how a
to
woman.
interact with men,
Yeah,
because
they're.
women don't know how to please us anymore besides being freaky in the sack.
Oh
That
yeah,
seems
there's.
to be all they have now, and that's really weird, because that used to be the thing that mothers didn't
Talk.
teach. They would
No.
say a few things carefully chosen, but most, like 99% of what they were transmitting on how to be a good partner to your man wasn't about bedroom stuff.
Nope, it was not. And there's also like I the pearly things, right? And I talk about her a lot because she does have all these very young women, feminist women on her show, and she hammers them pretty hard on the fact that they don't bring anything to the table but a body, and every one of them, that's
Body and attitude.
right. And it's
Those two
like
things, body, attitude.
I'm gonna get Phil's opinion because you and I have kind of dominated the conversation for a little bit because Phil's a younger man than us. Um, but I wanted to set this question to Phil as a thought, as he's not in his 40s. Um, See, with me and my wife, right, we have a very good relationship, and I am by far definitely a traditionally masculine male. And I will tell you up front, my wife is basically a feminist by fact. And she'll tell you she can do anything that a guy can do, but she doesn't want to, right? So it's not that she's incapable, it's not her role. But the reality is, my wife equals me. She expands me. I didn't marry her to take care of her, right? I didn't marry her to have a second child to take care of for the rest of my life because I felt some parental requirement. I married her because she multiplies my abilities. She makes me a better version of me. So, and I can offload work to her and I can offload tasks with the supreme belief that she'll get it done. And that is one of the things that masculinity, when secure, allows you to do. I'm secure in the fact that I'm a man. It's not an affront to my manhood if my wife does something for me. It isn't that I expect my wife to be my slave or servant. It's
Is this a
that
question for Phil or?
I'm getting there. So,
Okay.
Phil, you're a young guy,
I'm
and
just
I
kidding.
know this was all of the byproduct of how I was raised around a very traditional man masculinity marker and my grandparents and my uncles and my family. What is it
Mhm.
being like now? You're 20 something. And what does it look like now growing up without having that necessary um, role model?
Well, I can't really speak on that because I had a good role model. Um, for 18 years. Plus, I had my grandfather, and then I had my dad's business partner was up there in terms of role models, and so I can't really speak in those regards.
What to say? That's more for me. Yeah, you had
And so
good,
like I got
strong
I
male
got
role
really
models.
lucky in having a father that had an old type of upbringing. He didn't tell me he loved me very much at all. And part of that has to do with like it meant something when he said it. And so I think he said it maybe twice in my entire life. He told me he was proud of me once, and so like that's again that's a very old perspective of parenting because it's not a you don't have a lovey-dovey relationship with your father. It's a very mentoring.
I hated my
Um,
dad. I fought all
Well,
the
you have
time.
to. The
sometimes I did
idea
too,
is you
man.
have to
I
earn it,
mean,
right? You have to earn
sometimes
it.
I did because like we would work shit, man. We would work 12 hours in a day, and it was 107 degrees in near Kansas City, which would be um, anyway, just doing concrete work on top of a roof. Think I liked that? No, but I didn't like him in regards to that. He forced us to work it, like, um, but at the same time, I had a respect for him, because I knew how hard he worked, because I was working the same job he was, maybe not to the same degree, but I could respect his ability to get up every single morning and work. And so I don't look at it as a like I disliked him. I might have disagreed with him a few times, but I always knew he was top dog. Like nobody touches him, and you don't talk back to your dad ever, ever.
Yeah,
And that's like I wasn't raised like everybody else, like the kids that you can see on I guess to say to my age like peer group, I guess, where their dad is
Well,
like
you
on
can
TikTok
tell.
and shit. It's like no, not at
Yeah, you
all.
can tell. You can tell the ones that have been raised with, how to put it, firm boundaries in the sense that there was somebody growing up that they knew that they couldn't and wouldn't. absolutely would not like mess with or try to punk or disagree with or insult or disrespect in any way. Like
Mm-hmm.
nah.
So,
And
And it wasn't
for
it
me it
wasn't a
was like
negative thing, just for the
no,
record,
God, no, no.
because like
It's
it
the
showed
kids who
me
don't have
boundaries.
that are the ones who they look pretty goofy and they get themselves in really dumb situations.
well, they're also the ones that are actually dangerous because they don't hold any value of human life.
Well, you must see that, Phil, because you're younger. I mean, talk about the kids at your age you suspect
Oh,
don't
good.
have what you got.
Well, so there's a kid. Um, on my weekends, I work at a pizza shop, and um, during those weekends, I run into this kid. He does like the gang signs. He's like a skinny Caucasian kid, like cool dude.
Oh,
You
that's so
know,
cringe.
but he's figuring life out. You can't really just you know blame him for it. He's what
Yeah,
17.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And like when I was 17, no, that was not doable. And then on top of that, um, he his respect for life. I guess you could, if you wanted to throw it um, under that bubble, right? Then you could say it's less, but he doesn't respect his elders at all. And so we've got to watch him in the front to make sure he doesn't go talk to a client and treat them poorly. And so we're working with that. We're trying to cultivate that. But it's like a pizza shop. You really can't expect a lot from someone. So,
I have a problem with that thought. I have a problem with dismissing people's accountability for bad behavior. And I think that's a serious issue we've got in society at the moment is that we go, oh, well, this guy, we got to give him some slack for being rude, impotent, not being, no, we don't. We, in fact, don't have to. In fact, we need to hold more of their feet to the fire. We need to
mm-hmm.
be more hard on these weak men. Because
Well,
if we
okay.
allow weak men to continue to dominate our society, we will continue to have the decline in the social behaviors of people.
There's a spectrum, though. You
The
don't want
answer
to
is
go.
yes,
You
but
don't want
the
to
answer
pendulum
is
swing
also
too hard.
no. Correct.
Yeah.
Because it's
Well,
you
that's where
start
we're at
doing
right
that
now.
and they will, well, no, not really, cuz like
I wish.
let's say this kid is shit, man. Let's say this kid is he is exactly as I describe, i.e., just no respect for elders. Like this kid has some, but let's say they, just for the thought experiment, has none at all. Then you want to try and say, okay, well, where are you wrong? And you want to get him to point that out. And you're going to curb him. You're going to curb him hard, especially when he does something bad. But you're not going to sit there and go, okay, now you're a failure and we got to fire you, because that doesn't contribute anything to society at all. And you actually fail him and you fail the people around you and his family if you just decide to just push him over the edge and go, well, you're garbage and you got to sit in the cooler, and freeze your ass off because you can't talk to clients anymore. Um, he's got to figure it out. Like when I was 6 and 7, I didn't know how to talk to people, like my own peer group. I didn't even know how to respond to anything. If they just wanted to go play dodgeball, I didn't know how to respond to that. I
I
had to
mean,
figure that out.
and
You
and
know?
and
Yeah,
that
Peterson talks about that specifically and I think I think our overall, like our society has become very enamored with kind of the compassionate angle and the compassionate view of pretty much any situation. And there's so many situations where the what's better for a person is to let them suffer a little in the moment
Mm-hmm.
in order to figure it out on their own, which then gives them the confidence that the next time that they're encountering something that they don't know how to figure out, that they can knuckle down and figure it out. If you don't, if you aren't willing, if you're so compassionate that you're not able to let that person experience that suffering, then they're never going to get that growth. And instead, all they're going by virtue of you preventing them from growing, their only other recourse is to notify an authority of some kind,
Mm-hmm.
which is why now we have several generations of leftist woke school tattletales, and all it seems they just the amount of pleasure they get out of pointing out the sins of others is really something. I mean, and it's not good, and it's
No.
certainly not masculine.
No.
In another sense, it's like I don't want to pose this because it's a question that I'm having um, during the conversation. Is that, let's say this young kid of 17 who we do not want on the front of the desk. Um, there's the far end of the spectrum, which is keep him in the back and don't expose him to, the harsh reality, i.e., the awkward moments. And then the other side is to put him in front of the awkward moments and the tough moments, so that he either fails to figure out he doesn't know, and or fails in the process, and then goes, okay, I got to fix this.
Well, you
But
have to
then
set the
there's
expectations first. You
right
have to
there's a
educate them.
there's an
Educate
even
first.
there's an even worse problem, which is he even if you were to go, you know, the kid was to go to the front and make a mistake, he would walk to the back thinking he did it just fine.
So that's yeah. I
More of a
mean,
parenting issue from like way back when the kid would just do something and the parents go, okay, it's fine. Like now that's just
it's
registered into his brain that that's okay to, have a negative experience, and that negative experience wasn't a negative experience for him. He was just
But
like,
no, but
it's because he doesn't actually understand how to properly process and learn
correct.
from his negative experiences,
failure.
from his failures, from his mistakes. Call them what you want. Yeah, and it's something I've talked about for a while. It's something a conclusion I came to, oddly enough, in playing Warships. Just noticing, I was like, how can somebody play this game 30,000 times and still suck? And it just suddenly realized, oh, the answer is that they don't is that I have just assumed that getting better by virtue of failing at something was just like an automatic innate process that we all had, and so we all just did it. But I've seen those accounts, I've played with those guys, and then I've seen it in different like in real life contexts. Oh god, have I ever seen that too? People have been driving their whole lives and still suck, and it's
Some
just
of
like, how do you not get better? Oh, because learning through experience and failure is not innate and automatic. And
and some of it
yeah,
has to do with you can't teach competence. And I know me and Brian have talked about this a bit, which is
I think you can raise it like as a
you
parent,
can you can
but once it
augment.
gets to the like 18 and they're at the workplace, no,
Yep.
I don't think your employer can fix that.
And that comes to part of the one of the many facets of competency, which is what do you deem what's considered trying to find the right word, acceptable, right? And then where do you set your bar as a human being?
So
Like
In
if I
let's
was
terms
narrow
of
that down
like
to
their behavior at work, or
across the board, like if you were to say, okay, let's just take work for example. Let's say you
well,
man,
you
I don't
just
know.
don't you just have like you have measured deliverables and expectations
Well,
for
right, but
the
it's the
job and
ones
the
you
work behavior, and if they match up, they're good, and if they don't, they don't, right?
right, but it's the ones you set for yourself, right? In a game like World of
Oh,
Warships where it doesn't really matter, right? I don't want to be
self-driven,
I
right?
don't want to be the person who, does 20,000 a game, right? I don't want to be that dude. I want to be the top of the top. Like like if I'm looking at a player, I'm looking at like the sub 1%. I'm going, okay, how are they playing and why are they playing the way that they play? And sometimes it's like, well, they're playing this way and that ways it generates wins, but it's not as fun, right? And so then there's my decision to go toward what's fun, which nets me a lower win rate and a lower, a higher damage per game, right? Whatever.
Well,
Um,
let's make an example out of this. Just something's occurring to me, like just as a way to kind of map this onto the topic. Like, so do we think? Because I'm asking this with no idea what the answer is. I'm just thinking about it now. But if you think about that player that I described,
Mm-hmm.
like that guy who plays 30,000 games and never gets any better at the game. It's difficult to say in a vacuum, but I mean, does that strike now? And then say, as a comparative, a player who, a man who gets better at the game over time and is competitive and serious about it, in the sense, like serious enough where he sees improvement and is like, say top 1%, something like that. Which of those two, without looking at any of their other behaviors or knowing anything about them as men, like which of those two like behavior sets, fact patterns seems more masculine? Like I'll answer for myself right away. The more competitive one, to me, right away seems more masculine.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is some element, to me, like a healthy masculine man, I think is competitive at something. It doesn't have to be like traditionally masculine pursuits, like football or whatever. But I think that I'm a bit concerned about men who don't want to compete with other men, like for fun, but at anything.
Well,
Ever.
there's
And I know guys like that, and I have to say, they're I find them very bewildering. Um, I was actually talking with a coworker about one of them the other day, and I was saying to him, I was like interacting with this guy that I work with. It's the like I just feel like I'm constantly poking him, going, "Come on, be a man, react, like get angry," because like some of the things I say to him, I wouldn't permit anyone to say to me. Certainly not another man. Like he does. He just like makes jokes, and I'm just like, come on, like call me an asshole, like hit me, do something. He won't, and it doesn't like, and he's not even sitting on anger, and it's not like he's some Zen monk who's just floating above it all. Oh, he wishes. No, it's just that drive to like dominate and conquer and
he's
compete in
been
some way.
demasculated.
It's not in him. And
Well,
it's so weird because I am not Mr. Alpha. I'm not Mr. Macho Guy. I'm so not that dude.
I
But
don't
I
know
am
this.
competitive. And
I don't.
it's just
I don't know this guy, but there are two sides to that. The one that doesn't get, the one that doesn't challenge back, right? There are two different, at least from my perspective, there are two different types of men. The men who are just, who will take it and move on because it doesn't matter to them. Because
because they're too secure to care. Yeah.
well, men, like, I don't say that I'm too secure to care, but to some degree, I don't really care what other people say to me, even if it's like to provoke me to anger. It
We're
doesn't bother
describing the
me,
same thing with different words.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then, like, the other side, is that they're apathetic and they just don't care. They don't have that,
yeah.
what you were talking about, which is like the innate drive
Yeah,
to be
and I
masculine.
totally get what you're saying. And yeah, like the first guy you're describing, like to be clear, that first guy you're describing, I wouldn't be poking.
No, we wouldn't
Because
let you.
I could, but I mean, I would quit. Like, I wouldn't get any reaction, and I think I would know. Like, yeah, no, like, because there's certain guys that I have great respect for that I work with, that I know if I said something pokey like that. Well, actually, one of them, I won't use his real name. We'll just call him Bob. I mean, I was I was not having a good day, and I was a bit slick with him, not lying, but I was a bit disrespectful about something. And he actually came over and talked to me about it a couple of minutes later, because it was one of the days we were working in the office. And he was really respectful, but no, I apologized, because he came over right away and he wasn't aggressive or anything, but he like took it in the moment. But then he came over and was like, so what was up with that? I don't think that was that cool. And just the way he handled it, like I had, like a guy like him, it just, if I poked him, I know he would either brush it off, or he would like, he would take offense to it, but he would do it in a way that is like calm, masculine, unemotional, that I just can't get away from because, yeah, I was being a dick. Like, what can I, I'm going to have
Well,
to lie outrageously to not bite the bullet on that. I don't lie outrageously. I just say, yeah, no, I was being a dick. So, I mean, but this other dude, like, yeah, I can just, like, and again, I'm not bullying him or anything like that, but just like little things. And it's funny because lately he was like, he'll be insanely passive aggressive and rude to others, and no one seems to, that just seems to be like the norm. But aggressive is, ooh. But no, I've never,
well,
it's just really weird to me when you're dealing with a guy like that. And like all the video games he plays, all of them are player versus monster. And he doesn't, like, he's not competitive in that either. Like, he doesn't play any, he used to play, I think, PvP games, but he doesn't anymore. And it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting because it's like, and he's a really cool dude. I don't have a problem with him, but it's when I try and interact with him, I don't know, just like as a guy, it it's really weird. It's just, yeah, there isn't
you don't
that.
have respect for him
Well, that's fair to say. I don't have respect for him
as a man.
as a man. No,
So,
because he
and
doesn't have that,
there's something to that, and
like,
I think that right,
yeah, if there was a gunman who needed to be tackled,
he's not the one.
he's the last person. I would put myself ahead of him, way ahead of him. And I'm so not Mr.
Well,
Macho Man, but I would put myself way ahead of him in terms of having a probable chance of stopping that gunman. Yeah, I mean, it's just because I at least am aggressive and can get angry enough to kill. And I'm not confident he can.
so there's something that you're alluding to that I think is part of the challenge in our discussion about masculinity and what that should look like. Men in the past, when we go back in time, we had to compete for a mate. We had to compete for attention of girls, and that was done through, whether it be sports, whether it be scholastics, with your mind, you know, towering ability to speak. You had to find a way to be an attractive
Better
mate for
than
someone.
average. The
Correct.
phrase I use is you had to pick something that other people cared about that contributed value of some sort to society and be better than average at it.
And
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 boom.
what you have now is a society that men aren't being taught to be competitive. They're absconded if they are in any way, shape, or form, demonstrating a competitive trait because everybody has to win because we have to have equity. We have to have
Well,
an
and
equitable
it's
outcome
not
for
just equity, it's
everyone.
also it's that compassion I was talking about. I mean,
Excessive.
uh,
It's empathy.
excessive,
It's excessive
excessive.
empathy.
Well, I don't want to. It's a very
Well, you
selective
got to
empathy
know
though,
how
because
they
they have
feel.
no. Well, they have no empathy for masculine men. They have
Oh
no
no,
empathy for
we're the
masculine
devil.
boys. Like for boys that have lots of energy and testosterone, they have no empathy for them whatsoever. So if it's empathy, it's very selective. It's more, it's that compassion angle where they're not thinking about the winners. All they're doing is thinking about the losers and thinking, how can we make the losers feel better in the moment rather than letting them feel the sting of defeat, decide that they don't like the taste of that, and get better. So it's like when you give everyone a participation, when everyone goes home with a trophy and no one gets to feel like a loser, well, then no one has really, as far as I can tell, gone through that necessary experience of losing, realizing that somebody's out there that's better than you, that's just put in more hard work. However, they've done it, they're just better than you, way better than you. And that if you don't want to be last again, you might want to do something about that. We're just afraid that, I think everyone's afraid of the self harming aspect of it. There were a few cases of that. But again, that's another thing where it's like we didn't used to, we saw far more, in my opinion, vicious, dangerous, and um, actual harm causing bullying back in the days before there were cameras everywhere and the internet than we do now. Now we see cyberbullying, but I mean, yeah, I got bullied a bit. You were to ask me which would I prefer to go through, being cyberbullied as a teen or being physically bullied as a teen? Yeah, I'll take the cyberbullying every day of the week. Thank you very much.
Well, I also had that experience, and I grew up in a very harsh environment as a kid in Baltimore. And, the things that the kids did to me growing up because I was nice, literally because I was a nice kid. I was good. I was not
Oh yeah, you don't want
a
to be
mean
nice.
kid.
You want
So,
to be funny. Like if you're
right.
funny, then you can hang out with the tough. You make the tough guys laugh, they won't beat you up. I learned that quick.
Well, I mean, they would tape needles to my chair, so when I sat down, it would stab me in the ribs.
Ooh, yeah.
You
See,
know that
that's not.
that was the malevolence that I was dealing with as a teenager, and they
I
would.
was me in junior high. Yeah.
So
But to be clear, everyone go. Like I didn't see anyone
not
who
taking some
didn't
kind of shit.
like maybe the people at the very very top, but I've kept track of some of those people and just run into them over the. Most of those people who are the very very top in junior high and high school, at least in my experience, didn't like that was the peak. They didn't really go on to do like they're doing fine. They're doing like I am, but that means that I've caught up to them. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah,
So that goes to a question of you know masculinity. What is it? What should it look like? We've been talking about the
yeah.
vacuum
I've
of
made a list here.
masculinity. We've been talking about the vacuum of it. We've been talking about its absence. But what is it?
So let's talk about some positive examples, right?
So that's where I was going. It's like
Yeah.
if you think about the harshness of the '60s and '70s and '80s, when you know latchkey kids were, you know, I saw somebody call us feral kids, and I thought that was a really good description. As
I knew a couple of kids in elementary school that would spend entire weeks sleeping in the woods by the school because they didn't want to get the shit beat out of them by their dad again.
so
I
yeah,
mean,
there
I knew
was
kids who had it rough, like
yeah
way
like
worse than me.
and that's where I think that there was you know that toughening of men, right?
Those are
Was
tough kids, yeah.
you know that experience does one of two things to a man, right? So he either becomes a protector of the weak if he was abused, if he was raised by that weak man that would beat a child or beat a woman or would be less than kind to those weaker than them. Um, those usually became men who very much they became cops, firemen. They become the antithesis of that weak male. And right now, you have an apathy amongst men because they kind of don't care what's going on around them anymore because they're so, for lack of a better description, we're we're demonized.
Well, we're disincentivized. I mean, there's a huge disincentive for like classically male behaviors right now.
Yeah, because you're
You know,
immediately the devil. If you're a conservative cis male,
unless it's self-sacrificing. If you're taking
like
a bullet to save a woman, then you're a good man. I mean, everyone still agrees that's good.
well, the term cis male is become negative. Like you don't have any social credence if you're a guy. So
That's only with a certain. That's
unless
with
you're
certain
gay,
people.
trans, or some other, well, in the so in our
Like
leftist
that's
dominated
not the way it
society,
is at my work. I mean,
right? But in our leftist dominated social,
I get to have an opinion.
right? Our leftist dominated social hierarchy says that men who act masculine are bad and men who act like women are good because they're
Well,
not
I mean, it's
masculine.
but they're confused, right? Because they still want a bunch of things. Like the two kind of modern current day examples that struck me just because I was writing and thinking about this beforehand, in terms of like exhibiting both positive and positive traits that are like good, that are good examples that where you can use them as exemplars of that, and then some not so good traits. The most obvious one, duh, Andrew Tate is like the big one that everyone knows, who at least who's connected to like the internet or the manosphere. And certainly all the young people seem to know Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
So I was writing. I'll just quickly. I just jotted down some notes, and feel free to comment. So I just noted for his positives in terms of like what I think of as positive, good masculine qualities. I put he's dangerous, but he's in control of himself. He doesn't scream or lose his temper that I've seen, and he has some pretty tempestuous debates. So that's good. He's goal oriented and extremely driven. He's highly financially successful because of this. So that's classic male behavior. That's what we want to see.
Competency.
He's yeah. He's picked something. He's picked a goal, and he's extremely. I would assume that if you did the Big Five test on him, he would score very high in conscientiousness. Um, Men in general tend to score a little bit higher on conscientiousness than women, and yeah, the men who score, I think conscientiousness is the single highest predictor of success among the Big Five. If you're scoring high in that, you're probably going to be making money. He's confident and attractive to women, and he's highly successful with them. Indeed, to the point that like his whole, he's described, and others who've worked with him have now described his how he gets women to come back with him to Romania. And he's kind of like a cult leader. Basically, he's really good at getting young ladies to fall so head over heels in love with him that they make irrational decisions. So he's good with women, and he is articulate and intelligent in verbal arguments. So
He's
just another way
cunning.
of saying, yeah, he can hold his own. He's smarter than you would think he would be for somebody who's been kicked in the head that many times. So for his negatives, the biggest one is that he's amoral. He has converted to Islam very recently. Um, we will see. I'm all about behavior. So if his behavior and articulated statements change and show some kind of moral calculus behind them, that would be great, because at least as far as I'm conversant with all of his statements and interviews and debates and all that, he doesn't seem to have any kind of moral framework whatsoever. He doesn't really seem to consider things in moral or ethical like terms at all. I think he just sees things in terms of their outcomes, like with other people with regards to effects on himself. So his conversion to Islam, I put it in brackets, like we'll see. In theory, that's why I said like that's really good. He needs some kind of hard set of moral values that require him to humiliate like and humble himself before something greater than himself, because he's so arrogant. That was my second big negative on him. Arrogant. He's unwilling to ever be wrong. I've never heard him admit to anyone scoring a point on him in any debate or in any situation. He just seems like he's top G. He wins everything all the time. Huge red flag. Yeah. So, anyways, that's my quick
Now
Andrew
I'm going to
Tate
give
takedown.
you I'm going to give you
Because most of it was positive, I
the converse of Tate is Peterson.
think.
Peterson.
That's so awesome. That's the second guy that I picked. Take it
So
away.
so for me, Peterson truly represents a good monicum of what real masculinity should look like. Because I think Jordan.
So let's talk about the differences between
That's what I was going
Peterson
to.
and Tate. Yeah.
So when you look at Jordan's debate of people, he's very rarely lost a debate in any meaningful way. There's people who have had differing opinions of him that he couldn't persuade or couldn't uh, influence to a different perspective, but he's never.
As long as he stays away from atheism,
Yeah,
he's pretty. I haven't seen him engage in a debate where I felt
he
that
lost.
he like lost or failed to be persuasive, however you
Right.
care to define it. The only place I've ever seen him look really foolish is when he talks about atheism. He doesn't know anything about that, but he thinks he
Because he's
does because he studied communism.
right.
So
And part of the thing with Peterson, when you look at him as a abject study and his book that he's written, several books that he's written, they all they follow a pattern that is historical and what a man should be from a virtue.
Well,
He's
Peterson also is humble. I think what
yeah,
you're
he is
talking about is
very
like
he's humility.
Peterson references basic, like Peterson doesn't reference himself.
No,
All
he's
Peterson
not.
ever does is reference other people
That's right.
because that's really what somebody who knows a lot should be doing, right?
Right.
Tate only really ever references himself and his own life success to the point where his business model is to have a like basically a hustler school where
Mm-hmm.
people learn the model that worked for him, which is to become a world famous kickboxer and then run a sweatshop of cam girls. I mean, I don't know. It's the whole thing seems a bit cringe to me, and I think maybe that's one of the things I would want to put my finger on is a difference between Andrew Tate and Peterson is that they're both very successful, um, but one of them is much more humble
And Jordan is
than
lifting
the
people
other.
up. Yeah, Jordan is lifting people up, not profiting off of them. Although he does profit, he's doing it in a
Well, yeah, he
manner.
makes a lot of money
Oh
now,
yeah,
but I mean,
but he's doing it off of the idea of what's right.
Peterson also doesn't challenge other men to physical combat to settle an intellectual dispute. That's something that Tate has done over and over and over again, which to me is just a complete eye roll. It's like, and it's not a dispute about Tate's character. I understand that defending your word and your image in the community is something people have died for a long time. I'm not going to argue that point, but I'm just talking about like, yeah, he has an argument with somebody over some minutia of I don't know feminism or whatever. It's like, and I challenged him to physical combat, and of course he declined. And I'm like, okay, but we don't settle disputes
It isn't like if
anymore
I beat
at
your ass, you're
all.
suddenly right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that to me, it was one of the things that I wrote where I put a question mark beside it because I thought this sounds so goofy to say, but yes, he's extremely adept at unarmed physical combat, but it strikes me that he might be a little bit naive as to the reality of real like street fighting combat.
Where
Like, has he
somebody
ever
can
been,
stab you. Yeah.
or you get jumped by like a dozen dudes, or just somebody sucker punches
Well,
you
he doesn't
from
consider
out of
that as an
nowhere, like,
option.
or breaks a bottle?
Right, but he doesn't consider that as an option because of his own
Well, I
physical
know, and that's what
prowess.
tells me that he hasn't like been in. There is a really famous incident in Vancouver here. Jean Claude Van Damme. This was in the early '90s, I believe. Jean Claude Van Damme was in town filming because Vancouver is a huge filming. We're like the Hollywood of the North, basically, because we got government gives huge subsidies to filmmakers to come up here, and our dollar's cheaper. So Jean Claude was up here filming, and he went out to a biker bar in Vancouver because he's Jean Claude Van Damme. He throws windmill kicks. He's the Bloodsport guy, and yeah, he mouthed off some bikers, and yeah, he was in hospital. I mean, and it's just like, yeah, it just Andrew Tate strikes me, and what's his name? Jean Claude Van Damme was a kickboxing champion too, and it strikes me as a guy who's never like, could he beat me up? Sure, of course he would. But could he beat me up and three of my friends in a dark alley when he didn't know we were coming? No,
No.
he's dead. He's dead. Like 100%. It doesn't matter. Is he unarmed? Oh, he's really dead. He's unarmed. Give me a break. We have knives. We have guns. Like, it seems that he just doesn't understand that these days, like, there is a reason that we don't do dueling anymore. Our force multipliers are way too good. Not like the old days where two dudes with pistols that weren't accurate beyond like 3 feet. Really? We're shooting at each other from a really long distance away who didn't know what they were doing. Like, these days, if you had dueling, everyone would kill you. Like, it would be dual fatalities almost every single time. And it's just, there's a reason we don't do that. And I think men have a little more like,
Polish.
well, when I look at a man, I certainly like just some random dude I'm encountering, every normal guy I think kind of has a quick, could I take this guy analysis in his head upon encountering any other dude? But you're doing that just like physically, just based on like unarmed. But I think sophisticated, normal modern men now, we still do that calculus because that's like our lizard brain. But then we do the mental calculus of what if this dude has a knife or a gun or a needle, the scariest one, a needle that he's been using and get you some AIDS and Hep C, or what they call a rig. I mean, you do if you're at all, if you've had any experience with real street violence, those are the thoughts going through your head. It's not, do I think I can take this guy with my judo throw? It's, is this MFer going to stab me or shoot me?
Well,
Because that completely negates the fact that you're the kickboxing world champion. If the dude pulls out a clinch pick and rams it into your guts, well, now you're just dead and you were wrong. And it's just, I think that I like Tate, the way he puffs out his chest and goes walking around. I'm like, if you did that in Dagestan, you'd be dead. Someone would just shoot you. Someone would just shoot you and you'd be dead. And
so
the
that
fact that it wasn't honorable, what does that mean? You're dead. Like,
well,
there's just a reality there that I don't think he doesn't carry himself in a way that says to me like he's had a real masculine male enemy who wants to kill him. Because if you've ever had that, it really, I think, knocks a bit of sense into you when it comes to like, you know, just because you can take a guy physically because you've got your little tummy muscles, he could come back with a gun and shoot you dead.
well, I
And
think what you're
it's just,
articulating and to
Peterson has that respect. I think to close, Peterson does not challenge men in any way, shape, or form to some kind of like, oh, we could take it outside. And I think even if he were able to do that, like if he was some crack marksman or was like some secret, jujitsu guy, I still don't think like an example. Here's another better example of that to compare to Tate. Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has immense physical
prowess.
fighting. Yeah. Oh my goodness, easily the equal of Tate. Joe Rogan does not ever like, he's the antithesis of that. The last thing he would ever do is challenge people to a fight. There's so many videos, particularly from the old days, like the Fear Factor days, of him getting challenged by people in the street and him just like diffusing it with humor, laughing it off. It's like he has that real masculine calmness that comes with, that's appropriate,
Confidence.
I think, to that kind of power when you know that you can hurt, like most 99% of people that you're ever going to engage with, 99.9 are not only unarmed, they're untrained and don't really have any idea what to do. And you're a elite world class killer. You are a wolf among sheep in that context. And I think being arrogant in that context is not masculine.
No, it's not. And I think one of
That
the
is
things that
not
Rogan,
masculine. Men are calm and they're secure in the sense that they are not, by secure I mean they don't need everyone in their vicinity to always know that they're the big badass. They don't care because they know that they are.
well, that's
And
part of the thing
that's
that,
good enough.
well, here,
Or you're even more humble and you don't assume that you're the big badass. Like the best way to be, I think, is assume every other guy around you has a knife or a gun, and then just be polite. Like
well,
if everyone just assumes, it's like that, an armed society is a polite society.
yeah.
If we all assume, we don't even need to be armed. If we all assume that everyone else is armed, well, that'll do it because like
I've got a
no
quote
matter
for you,
how badass you think you are,
ML.
a 90-year-old grandmother can pull a revolver out of her purse and squeeze a trigger.
So here's
Anyone could kill anyone.
Sam Colt really articulated this the best of many men. He said it like this. He goes, God created all men. Sam Colt made him equal.
Well, it's one of the biggest. It's one of the most effective and also funniest in its execution and how it plays out. Argument to use. I've seen none other than Sam Harris. Sam Harris is uh, big for
Anti-gun.
guns rights. No, he's big on guns rights. He owns firearms. He practices jujitsu. He's actually a really dangerous guy. He is totally pro Second Amendment. I know it's so unusual because he's this huge atheist leftist, but he's absolutely pro gun ownership, responsible gun ownership. And the strongest argument he makes for it, that he's made over and over, is he says it's it's actually misogynistic to argue against people having the ability to defend themselves with guns, because if there's no guns around, then it's a matter of the biggest, most physically strong male. And in that scenario, women always lose.
Yep.
Ronda Rousey would have a chance. That female bodybuilder who fought off the Florida guy, yeah, she'll have a chance. But your average woman, no chance whatsoever. With a gun, even a disabled woman can kill a male, attack her many times her size and lethality with the simple pull of a trigger. And why would we take away that equalizer from women? It makes them completely physically subordinate to men. The equalizer is the force multiplier. Pepper spray, don't do it.
No.
Gotta be a gun. Taser, don't do it.
There has to be lethality.
It has to be lethal.
And that's the interesting thing.
Well, at least until, slight diversion, until I think everyone's so crazy on both sides about, like, pro or con or whatever, about law enforcement either, defunding or just rethinking it. To me, does it not seem hopelessly obvious to anyone else that the biggest problem we have is strictly one of physics? It has nothing to do with racism or anything else. It's that we don't have currently, well, okay, sorry, I'll rephrase. Currently, we only have one way to consistently stop a charging, angry adult male, I mean, pun intended, dead in his tracks. For sure, guaranteed. We only have one way to do that, and that is a firearm. That's a problem. If we had a non-lethal way to incapacitate a charging man that was like 100% effective, not 50% like the taser, ridiculous, and it sometimes kills when we don't want it to. Taser, it's a step in the right direction, but we need to go more. If we had a technology,
Star Trek stun guns, baby.
Yeah, something that, or like some kind of big gluey thing that just, or like Ebola that wraps you up, and so you can't use your limbs anymore. Just something. And I'm not aware of any effort. Like, where's the billions of dollars being dumped into that research? Get us something that can drop a charging man unconscious or immobilize him, so just make him no longer a threat without killing him, that works at range 100% of the time. That really doesn't seem like such a big ask in today's world with like cell phone technology and shit. We're still using Colts to stop charging men because all we have is like pepper spray, not even close to 100% dispersion, is whack. Beanbag rounds, big guys ignore those, or they just don't. Yeah, it's like we don't have anything. The taser is the best we have. It is at best 50% effective, and at worst, you have to use it so many times that you end up killing the person, and you would have been better to just use your batons and break a few bones. So, I mean, anyways, to end the diversion, it seems like there's a huge, I don't know, just to me, like, I know I'm not that smart, but I'm like, can somebody point out that the really obvious thing that we're missing that I think would solve most of these problems, particularly that we're seeing in America with policing, is if the police had a tool at their disposal that exactly like you said, that was the just set it at that level of efficiency, like a stun gun, just something that you can point, click, an
They
effect
fall down.
happens, and that guy drops and is no longer a threat, but he's not dead.
Yeah,
We
set
just
for
need something.
stun, right? Phasers. But
Something.
well, the thing
The
about
taser was our first attempt at that. It's a good first attempt. I'm not going to hate on the phaser. Everyone hates on first generation technology, expecting it to be perfect. I think that's ridiculous. I think the taser has saved a lot of lives, but we can do better.
oh
And we
yeah,
haven't made any significant improvement in the taser for what, 20 years?
not really. And
Anyways, that's the end of
but
diversion.
yeah, but I think there's a good consideration about masculinity that violent behavior amongst men is, I'm trying to think of the way of presenting it. It's not that it's been glorified, right? But you now see almost every, like, you look at the games today, and I'm going to go on a tangent about any games or etc. But there is a serious glorification of committing violence. It's almost as if, you know, there's nothing societally that is represented as to what a man should be like. Like, where's the movie that talks about a guy that works really hard, builds a business, builds a family, he takes care of them, he doesn't abuse them. Like, there isn't, there's no
There used
role
so
models.
much media like that, and it's. I think
There's
it's so
like
boring
there's
now.
no
But like
John Wayne.
Coronation
Like, where's
Street,
John Wayne? Like,
yeah,
where's the guy that, you know, if you never seen the movie Rooster Cogburn, right? So there's a movie called Rooster Cogburn about with John Wayne, and Rooster Cogburn is the,
that's the protagonist from True Grit.
yeah. So Rooster
That's the
Cog,
name of
yeah,
yeah. Rooster was the
Rooster
guy from True
Cogburn,
Grit.
exactly, and he was a sheriff, but he was a bad guy, like in
So is
general.
this a sequel, or oh, this would have been
It
probably
was a
a
remake of the
pre.
movie.
Well, it probably would have been a prequel they did after the success of John Wayne's True Grit. That's my guess.
Well, it's a literal identical adaptation of the same movie. They're both called True Grit. So the
Oh,
original one is called True Grit, and the one that Jeff Bridges did is also called True Grit. And
well, yeah, yeah.
they
Okay,
basically,
so this is True Grit
yes, it is
you're
True
talking
Grit.
about. Okay, sorry,
So
that
the
was
character Rooster Cogburn was a drunk. He was a
yeah,
sheriff,
yeah.
right? But this little girl
Well, he was a
who's
bounty hunter. He wasn't really a sheriff.
right. So he was a marshal.
Marsh, yes, thank you. Yeah, you got it.
So in the movie, Cogburn gets this little girl who wants to get Ned Beatty, the man that killed her father, right? Enact revenge to bring him to justice. And she picks the kind of man that could do that. But he also defended women and children vehemently. So you have the danger, because Rooster Cogburn was universally feared. Is that you, Rooster? You know, like his reputation of being deadly was well known. So that movie highlighted the good and bad of being a man, the
Yeah, so let's
necessity
talk
for
about Rooster.
violence. Right.
His good was that he it's not good that he has the capacity for violence. That's neither good nor bad. That's neutral. It's a tool, basically. That's an ability. He
Mm-hmm.
uses that ability to the general good and would never use it to
For
harm
personal
what he
gain.
well no, he specifically uses it for personal gain because he's a marshal, but I mean that's just the nature of the job. I mean, he goes to arrest violent bad men who sometimes fight back and you know
Mm-hmm.
he sometimes has to shoot them, but he would never shoot a woman, he would never shoot a child.
He
You know,
wouldn't.
that movie the professional
Oh
serial
yeah,
killer, and that same thing, no women, no kids. So
Leon. That was
i
another
i, I
great
think
example.
I think like to me properly constituted masculinity involves competition between men, between male, well, not men, but males, specific, because it can, teenage, same thing. Um, and, um, and an aversion. So I think it's like there's a preference and there's an aversion. It's either side. It's coming from the same place. The preference is to compete with other males and to fight other males and to just like your outlet for
You're
your
finding your
competitive
hierarchy.
aggression. And yeah, and the hierarchy that you're competing in and trying to dominate, your preference is that it be comprised of other males. Absolutely.
We're not trying to
And I
dominate
think,
over women.
well, I think properly constituted men don't, I think proper masculinity, how to phrase this, they wouldn't, a man wouldn't have a natural inclination to compete against women
Yeah, I
or
agree.
children. Because competition is, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, you can think of it as like a competition being held on a spectrum of aggression. And it, so you can have like friendly competition at work, you can have friendly competition at a bowling league, you can have friendly competition at a video game. That's like at the least extreme. And then, things can get pretty, the competition at work can actually get pretty heated and personal and nasty, and stuff can happen. And then you can have competition maybe for a woman, and that can start to get possibly fatal. And then you have competition on the level of nation states through war. So, I mean, to me, it's always like you look at animals when they're playing, when they're young. You look at like tiger or lion cubs playing, and it's all prey practice. All of their play is practice for basically war, for the animal equivalent of war, which is, I mean, being in the wild, you're in a constant state of war. I mean, there is no peace. War, it can just happen at any time. And I think that, yeah, like men shouldn't be naturally inclined towards that sort of competition towards females. I don't think,
No.
because it just,
Let's give
I
Phil the
think
floor for a minute.
it just puts you in the it puts you in that energy. I don't think you want that aggressive energy in a man being directed at a female really at all. Like, not that kind of energy. I don't think that's going to lead to good outcomes ever.
So, Phil,
It's really difficult to disagree.
yeah, I don't want you to disagree. What I would like to do at this moment
Just build on
is,
it.
yeah, I would like to have each of you guys, give a closing argument for what you believe real masculinity should look like. And I only want your opinion. I don't want other people's thoughts. I want yours. What you believe masculinity should look like today.
Okay. Well, the first is that I don't think it's a crime to be masculine. And I think that would be the primary, especially if you're starting to or talking to someone who doesn't know.
Who's
On
never
top of
thought
that,
about it? I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's not it's not a negative to be truly masculine, and it's not that you're overpowering or trying to destroy people like you would typically hear in general news. It's the old moral code, the men that were feared in a sense that they were capable, but at the same time they had a code that they lived by, and sometimes it was a biblical moral code, sometimes it was a self-made biblical code that got passed down from their father to them that they used to govern their life, and that has been lost. And I think there's great value in having a moral compass. And I think that, in my mind, is one of the most important factors to being masculine. You can be as masculine as you want, and you can be as feminine as you want as a male. But I think if you don't have a moral compass, you're going to stray far from the desired path.
yeah, you'll just end up a monster.
Yep.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think that I think that our society has, how to phrase this, we're not treating every society throughout history, as far as we can tell, has had to deal in some way or another with what to do with male com- that competitive and aggressive male drive in social in the social context. And sports has been one of the most it's been like one of the standard ways for thousands of years as a way to direct that. Um, and I think that in the last 30 or 40 years, Western society just kind of all of a sudden just, well, you could say, lost respect for that energy. And and indeed, not only lost respect for it, they're actively trying to suppress it and to kind of not breed it out, but to educate it out of the populace and to say that it's not acceptable. And I think that's insane to me. That makes absolutely no sense, because to me, I like a positive masculinity brings everybody up. Like a properly constituted man is not some tyrant who is standing atop a pile of male bodies that he has killed at the top of a dominance hierarchy. It maybe like it seems to me like they think that how masculinity, how intramale competition works, is in the image of a boxer knocking out another boxer and just walking away and cheering. And realistically, no, it's those two guys in practice, and the one guy getting like hit and knocked down, and then the other boxer going over and giving him a hand back up, and then they spar again. And I'm not like it seems like the modern social conception of that aggressive masculine energy is that it can only be evoked in this like crushing, cruel, negative, destroying manner, which is certainly one of its modes. But they're acting like that's the only way that it's possible for a man to be aggressive and masculine, and therefore, because that's the only way, well, that's not a good way. It doesn't lead to good outcomes. So we're just going to stop the whole thing. And it's like, okay, but we're seeing it now. What, over 50% of women 30 and up, unmarried, childless, and all the women all over are all the single ladies are all saying the same thing, which is, where have all the good men gone? And when you ask them, like Pearl does, like Fret and Fish does, Fret and Fish, Fret, Fresh and Fit does, they almost universally, when they describe the man they want, guess what kind of man they're describing? They're describing an aggressive, competitive, conscientious, goal-oriented, driven, dominant, like physically impressive man. They're describing John Wayne. They're describing the exact same thing that women have desired cross-culturally throughout history. So it feels to me like we're playing this very silly game with ourselves, where we have reductively defined all masculinity by only its negative traits and negative outcomes, and then discarded the whole thing. And then so that's coming out of one corner of our mouths. The other corner, we're saying, where have all the good men gone? Where good is defined as being a product of all those things you just jettisoned. So if there is a way for anyone out there who's watching this to reconcile that for me. Make that make sense. Because that makes no sense to me. If anything, the fact that Andrew Tate has as much clout and influence as he does. When I watch Andrew Tate, if I'm being honest, what I see is just kind of like he's a meathead who has a bit of language. Like he's a bit smart, but at the end of the day, he's still challenging people who he can't prove a point with language to fight. So he's still kind of striking me as a bit insecure. Oh, and he's got a harem of like overcompensating much. I don't know. Everything about him just to me screams like he's not that great of an exemplar of a man. But I think that we have, by rejecting masculinity in totality and by not building any good, positive examples, like in our media, in our fiction, in our movies, anywhere, of what a good man should be, we've all become quite desperate for those classically masculine, aggressive characteristics properly evoked. And in that void and in that desperation, guys like Andrew Tate all of a sudden look pretty good.
So,
And I think that 50 years ago, Andrew Tate wouldn't have got anywhere. Because people were more sophisticated back then, and they would have looked at him and said, "I'll give you a break, buddy.
so
Go read a book." But now he looks like people are so desperate that they look at him and they're like, "Well, he's pretty masculine." I'm
well,
like, "Wow,
I'm gonna
okay."
chime in at this point.
I'll end it there.
I appreciate it. And as I was listening to you speak, I don't know if you've seen the movie. The Die Hard series are great with Bruce Willis, and my favorite
The
one.
first one, especially, like
Right.
that's a
So
man.
let
He
me
gets
speak.
hurt,
I, I
he gets effed up,
I
and he
know.
comes through.
Let me talk for a minute, as I have sat patiently. The the one that I like was Live Free or Die Hard, and that's the one of these films is going. It's about a fire sale, which is essentially a cyber attack on all of our infrastructure, and Will Ferrell is in. I think it's Will Ferrell. I think the kid's name was in the movie, and they had been blown up. They had a really just genetically or galactically shit day, and he asked Bruce Willis, the character, "Why you?" And he said, "Because I'm a man and it has to get done, and I don't trust anybody else to do it." So that was a really interesting statement, and
He could have just ended it because I'm a man.
right. So and
That's like the Chernobyl guy. All those soldiers
right.
who
So
went into Chernobyl, when interviewed afterwards, I've seen so many documentaries. All of them, to a man, even the ones dying of cancer decades later, none of them showed any regret, and they
no.
all said, "Well, it had to be done.
So I did it.
Someone had to do it. You send the men, and we did it." Yeah. Why?
So
It's like, if not, like, why me? Why not me?
right, and
Why
that's
wouldn't it be me?
and I
That's the
think
proper. Yeah.
and to me, the intrinsic nobility of masculinity is its willingness to sacrifice the highest measure for the good of those around them. And
No limits. I mean, if it
that
needs to
is
be, you have to sacrifice your life,
that's what you do
then that's what
because
you. It's the
and that's
positive end of what we were talking about last week with male disposability.
yeah.
Not every part of male disposability is bad. The fact that we are willing to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good is a part of that disposability, but it is a good thing in the right context.
And to me, the definition of masculinity in today's modern society should be that of servitude. A man is a servant to his family. He's a servant to his culture. He's a servant to um, the procreation of the species, and he's also responsible. And that's the thing that fetters that good and bad of masculinity is the account of responsibility that he is
And just
responsible
accountability. I
for.
thought you were going to
Yeah,
say an accountability.
it
It's
is an
just like,
accountability,
it's like there's a disaster.
and
Someone needs to fix it. I didn't cause the disaster,
but
but
let me go
someone
get
needs
it
to
done.
fix it.
When the
I'll take.
power's
I
out,
will take accountability for that because someone needs to. I'll do it.
so you took, you know, when the power grid in Texas went down because it was so cold. You had men bearing the most in absolutely unhospitable environment to get others warm, to
There's that
make
really
sure,
awesome video of
right?
all the. It was in Russia, and it was one of those friggin' frozen Siberian hellholes. And on the runway, and the plane had about like maybe 30, 40 people in it. Um, no, more like 50. Yeah, about 50 people in it. It got frozen. The tires got frozen to the runway. And so all the men, and so the pilot said, hey, can all the men on the plane, throw on your coats? Can you come outside? And we just got to push the plane to get the tires unstuck. They literally had to push it to get it unstuck. And so you just got all the women and children inside the plane where it's comfy taking video. And the dudes are out there. It's like friggin' the wind's blowing like crazy. It's like minus 40, and they're pushing the plane. They get it rolling, and then all the men hop back inside, and away they go. And it's like, yeah, that's
But that's
that's what you should do. It's your it's like, to me, everything just logically, it's like you're the most physically capable of moving that plane. And again, like at the core biological level, if you all die and the women all live, that's better than the inverse.
yep,
So all
and
right,
and
here we
and
go.
and that's what I mean by,
And your women and children, if they're properly constituted, will
well,
love you for
for
it
it. That's
and respect you
and
and honor
and
you for that.
and that's the
And
part.
genuinely, it won't be some thing in their head where they're like, "Oh, he did a good thing. I better show him how much I like that." Other boba. No, it'll be organic, and yeah.
And I think that's a good place for us to end this discussion, is that masculinity is a complex um, challenge that we're set, but I think it's an organic one. I think it's one that um, men know what to do. We know right and wrong, and women need to begin to be a participant in that sacrifice, that the men who build everything that they enjoy and make all of it happen for them, all of the men that they would constitute as, oh, they're toxic. Well, yeah, your perception of what toxic is based off of the security provided by that toxicity.
And and so many of these ladies have never attempted the alternate to what they're doing, which is
Oh
being
yeah.
masculinized. Like Bill Burr did a bit about how his, like him and Nia, his wife, they got a new place, and there was a bunch of crap in the garage from the previous owners. And so he went down there and just spent about 4 or 5 hours just schlepping all the crap out of the garage, just getting it all cleaned up. His arms get all scratched up. He's just huffing and puffing and tired. And it's now like about 11 o'clock in the morning. And Nia, his wife, came down without being asked. Didn't know that she came down and had a couple of sandwiches for him, all nicely made, all cut up with a big thing of potato chips on the side and a big uh, uh, soda in a glass with the ice and the whole bit, and just gave it to him, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and then just left. And he's like, 10 years later, I'm still telling that story. It's just, it's something that I'm sure that was passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. Like like the thing they all must have said in some semblance or another is, it's really not that difficult to please a man, and they're
No.
so thankful when you do it that you wonder why you haven't been doing it as much before. It just like, it's not. And the idea, like, you could tell that story of his wife doing that to a person, and you could see them interpret it in a way where it was like, oh, she was, subordinating herself to his desires. He's a big boy, he can get his own lunch, she's doing her own stuff, she's working too. But then there's the correct way of thinking about it, which is she just secured her marriage for the next decade with
Yep.
a move that took three
No effort.
minutes.
Yep.
I mean,
No effort.
that's efficiency to the max. She's a genius, and you're an idiot. Like,
So, gentlemen, next week I think we'll kind of go into what we expect. What would be an interesting conversation is to how do we convey to women appropriate behavior that would elicit men to act in a manner that gives them hey, where's that traditional guy at? Well, here's how you have to behave in
how can
order.
women be part of the solution? I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting
How can women? Yeah,
conversation.
well, yeah. What behaviors from women would
Do
elicit
we?
more masculine behaviors from men? Yeah.
That's a very good way of putting it. And
Well, and it also begs the inverse, of course, which
okay,
we'll have to talk about too. What behaviors from women do not, and in
elicit
fact, reject that masculinity from men? We'll have to talk about that too.
definitely.